I'm going to talk a little bit about the so what. How does this relate to daily life in a place like IDEO? Well, in a couple ways. So one of the things about taking this sort of approach is that it can tend to be sort of boxed into a certain area or really address only a certain level of people within an organization. And one of the things we like to think about is how would an approach like this really affect all of the people within an organization. So here we have sort of a very simplistic process by which we take this approach, but there's different benefits to different groups of people. So at the board and executive level, for example, they might be thinking about, all right, how do the issues of earth and wealth and health and equality really work on a strategic level? What are the goals that need to be set? Who's responsible for the results? And we have to make sure that we actually get to those. From a designer's perspective, which we've clearly highlighted here, perhaps it's issues of, okay, what is the initial vision that is being discussed? We sort of have this idea of social requirements. When you sit down with a client, there's a lot of things that go into the calculus of what you're going to create, what needs to be achieved, et cetera. Some of those issues are becoming more social and environmentally based. There's a sustainability group here. They're working on these programs. So what are these sets of requirements that are just parallel to everything else that need to go into the decision-making process at the beginning of a project? And then, of course, how do you iterate that over time? And then, in general, for staff, we find a lot of these issues really affect people just in terms of their inspiration and motivation, really allowing them to be part of a company that they're proud of. People just get kind of psyched to go to work, and that's pretty cool. And the more you can let them know what you're doing, the better they like it. So what are the benefits of all of this? Well, in the discussions with the people we've had here today, which has been fantastic, one thing is clear. It's about process. No one knows the answers at the beginning of a project. It's a matter of knowing what questions to ask and figuring out where you go from there. And this works very much that way. Here are some of 4 of the ways that we think about it, and surely there are many more. But the first, of course, is learning. We think of HIP sort of as almost a meta language or a common language, which you can use to compare different work. And the way we think about it is like this. Languages are designed, it's sort of a cliche, a common language. But really what we're talking about is not a lot of people saying the same thing, but giving a structure and framework for people to say many, many different things in a way that's mutually intelligible, right? So what HIP does is allow that to happen by taking these 4 areas, again, earth, wealth, equality, et cetera, and allowing each of those to be addressed within the specific components for a project. Every project, every product, every service is going to have different elements that feed into those areas. So you can't compare them head to head. But by taking this sort of approach, you can really start to have a language with which you can look at progress, you can look at change, and be able to then try and have a better understanding of how these different projects relate to each other. Another is this idea of portfolio of value. There's a lot of work going on here that can be fairly disassociated if you let it. But there's a lot of potential to take all of the different projects and really understand what kind of collective value are they creating. And again, with everything being so different, it can be very hard without having a common interface in which to think about it. Thinking about it from the HIP perspective allows that to happen, and you can look at not only each product, but what does IDEO as a company tend to give to the world. Adaptive management is another thing that's clearly important here. We live in a world of change. Contexts change. Everything changes, and you need to be able to adjust accordingly. By taking a sort of adaptive management approach, there's a certain nimbleness that you're allowed to maintain. And what this does is allow you to think about how you can constantly be making positive value. How can you keep creating value? A lot of people now, a lot of work is really focused on minimizing harm. We need to get past that, and I think the opportunity is there to do that. And finally, tracking progress. Again, there's a lot of emphasis placed on iteration and optimization. How do you take that learning? How do you see where you've started and see how you're changing over time so you're not starting from scratch every single time you think about these things? There's a lot of equilibrium to be found in earth, wealth, health, and equality. It may be impossible to reach sort of a 100% level for all 4 of the things. It may not be. But over time, you can really start to see where the equilibriums are and how much emphasis needs to be placed in one area or another. So what might this look like? This is just a very simplistic way to sort of visualize some of the thinking. But you'll see these colors on the left represented in this printout here. This is how we thought about the different companies that were evaluated. But you can imagine in these 4 areas, looking at them on a yearly basis. And you can just see over time, obviously, in general, the goal is to have maximum impact in all the areas. You can watch that change happen over time and start to compare and say, OK, here's what's happening, here's what's not happening, and start to think about the trends. You can imagine in year 1 that there's actually 10 of these charts, that they're all kind of stacked together. And you can take an average of them and start to think, OK, how is all of this actually applying together? How, as a company, are we reaching these goals? And maybe we realize, you know what? Consistently in equality, we lag. And everything else seems to be getting better over time. Well, what's going on? What are the trends here? And how can we think about getting deeper into the details and start to pull out some of the potential problem areas? And of course, at the same time, if something seems to be going really, really well, perhaps even without a lot of effort, fantastic. But let's get in there and figure out exactly what we're talking about and what's making this happen at this level. So finally, all right, what can you do to be hip or hipper? Because it's pretty hip around here. These are just, fairly straightforward, everyday life kinds of things. This type of thing is great at the beginning of a project and thinking about connecting projects, connecting learning, connecting success over time, and being able to make sure that that's stored and constantly put back into new projects. Testing the results, there's a lot to be learned, again, from success, from failure especially. With innovation often comes failure. That can be a very good thing as long as there's a process for taking the learning from that and putting it back into the system. Measuring the impact, we've talked a lot about that. Iteration and optimization as well, and then of course, sharing the success. So how do you actually get this information out to the world and make it public? There's so much great knowledge and so many fascinating projects happening around the world that are doing a lot of good. And if people don't know about them, they have some value, but not nearly as much as they could, as if people were able to be inspired by them and people could have ideas and models and ways of thinking about the work that they do themselves. So that's sort of the things that the average person can do in a fairly hip way. And that's about it.